Recognize the senator from Wisconsin.
I'll note we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I'll ask consent to be able to speak up to 25 minutes before taking the vote.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'll ask you, I'll ask everybody in the chamber, everybody listening to me on C-SPAN. Aren't you getting sick and tired of these government shutdown showdowns? The drama, the turmoil, the partisan bickering, the holding American people and our economy hostage for demands for billions and billions of dollars of more spending that we can't afford? I know I am. This madness doesn't have to continue. We can begin ending this madness tonight by voting on a very simple piece of legislation. Eliminate Shutdowns Act. Again, it's very simple. All it does is, if we don't pass an appropriation bill for all of government or any department, we don't shut those departments down. We don't shut all of government down. We do literally what the state of Wisconsin has done since the 1950s. We just keep spending at last year's levels. I mean, how more common sense can you get? Now, we accomplish that by enacting 2-week rolling continuing appropriations to fund, again, all of government or any department that doesn't have an appropriation passed for it on a rolling basis. Now, I asked the chamber, who could be opposed to something so simple that, again, prevents all this turmoil, all this drama, all this partisan bickering? Well, my guess is Democrats will oppose it. My guess also is some of our appropriators will oppose it. I've heard some of the rationale. I don't think it really holds water. What one point made is the problem with continuing resolutions. They fund programs that should be reduced or canceled, and they prevent important new programs from being started. Well, again, that will create the incentive. I agree with that, by the way. I don't like CRs either. That will create the incentive under these automatic, rolling, 14-day continuing appropriations to pass appropriation bills. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form diminish or detract from the authority of appropriators or the Appropriation Committee. I've also heard that appropriators, they want the pressure of government shutdowns to allow them to pass appropriation bills. I guess I somewhat understand their point, but I'd like to point out that that pressure certainly hasn't worked. Mr. President, I got here in the year 2011. I don't think anybody can dispute the fact that, at least since that point in time, and probably before that, the appropriation process is broken. It's dysfunctional. In 15 years, what we should have done in Congress is pass 180 appropriation bills during those 15 years. 12 a year times 15, 180 bills. You know how many we actually passed? 6. 6 bills. 1 for fiscal year 2017, 5 for fiscal year 2019. 6 bills. That's 3.3% success rate, or stated a better way, that's a 96.7% failure rate of the appropriation process. During that 15 years, we've had 3 shutdowns. We passed 55 continuing resolutions, 55. And people are going to oppose an automatic rolling continuing appropriation? By the way, this year, the continuing resolution that we did pass, it took us 6 months. 6 months of dysfunction before we finally passed the appropriation for this year, which, of course, is going to end in a day and a half. Now, what the shutdown pressure did produce is it produced the pressure to mortgage our children's future further. It produced the pressure to pass multiple 1,000-page omnibus spending bills. We've increased or suspended the debt ceiling 12 times in those 15 years since I've been here. Our debt has gone from $14 trillion to over $37 trillion. Clearly, this is a broken process. Spending is completely out of control. Now, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody to find out I brought a couple charts to basically make my point. I'd like to talk about a few facts, a few figures. This chamber is generally not really interested in talking about, like, figures. I guess my accounting background, I like to do so. Let me give you a little history lesson. This dates back, these are 4-year average deficits going back to the year 2001. And you'll see in the first two terms of President Bush's administration, average deficits were $200 billion, then $300 billion. So average over his 8 years, $250 billion worth of deficits. Again, those were unacceptably high back then. That's when $100 billion or two actually was real money. People were concerned about it. President Obama came into office with the Great Recession, and his advisor, Rahm Emanuel, said never let a good crisis go to waste, and they didn't. So in his first term, President Obama's average deficit was $1.27 trillion. That sparked the Tea Party movement. I'm part of that. And the Tea Party came, we actually made a difference. We did dig our heels in on that out-of-control deficit spending. And so for President Obama's second term, deficits averaged $550 billion. Again, $550 billion, that's a lot of money, except in Washington, D.C. President Trump came into office, divided government, and he had to do deals to get spending bills passed. So his deficit increased to $810 billion for the first 3 years. Then COVID hit. We went on a massive bipartisan uniparty spending spree, $3.1 trillion a year deficit. $3.1 trillion. We went from $4.4 trillion in spending to $6.5 and never looked back. Now, responsible leaders would have recognized that was an aberration. We can't keep spending once the pandemic's passed. You know, back in World War II, we had responsible leaders. We started World War II spending 11.7% of GDP. During World War II, that increased to 41% for the war effort. But responsible leadership brought that spending back down to 11.4% of GDP after the war in 1948. That's not what the Biden administration did. They kept spending at pandemic levels. We averaged during Biden administration deficits of $1.9 trillion. We'll have a deficit this year about $2 trillion. And the very sad fact is over the next 10 years, based on CBO's most recent figures, the total 10-year deficit is going to equal about $26.4 trillion. That's $2.6 trillion per year. It starts out about $2 trillion, ramps up to over $3 trillion by the year 2035. Now, most of our party leadership says the problem here is we have a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Let me just prove that point. This is one of my favorite charts that literally shows no matter how much we try and punish success with the top marginal tax rate, we've had back in 1959 a top marginal tax rate of 91%. How much would you work if the federal government took 91 cents of every dollar you made? I wouldn't work very hard personally. It's been as low as 28%. I would say for a brief period of time we were 72% free under Ronald Reagan. Now we're at 37% top marginal tax rate. But again, you can see the ups and downs. What's noteworthy about this chart, no matter how much we try and punish success, over time, It's been very consistent. We were able to extract 17.1% of the American economy in federal revenue. We've had a high of 20%, but that was after the dot-com bubble, and that quickly came back down to 17.1% average. It's time we recognize that reality. If we're going to ever balance our budget, what we need to do is get spending under control. We have a spending problem, which I think this chart clearly demonstrates. Back in 2000, we spent $1.8 trillion. $1.8 trillion. That was 17.7% of GDP. That was the year that we had 20% of revenue. We had a surplus for 4 years. We had a surplus for 4 years, and we frittered that all away. We finally broke the $2 trillion mark in the year 2002 after 9/11. All of a sudden, we're on a war footing. We had to spend more to defend this nation. And again, we've never looked back. The absolute high point, other than World War II, the high point in spending was during President Obama after the Great Recession, 24.4% of GDP. By the way, that year, because of the recession, revenue went down to 14.4%. That's what produced those massive deficits of $1.2, $1.3 trillion. 2014, again, the result of the Tea Party, we pretty well held spending flat about $3.5 trillion for about 5 or 6 years. And so spending as a percent of GDP, which is a relevant figure, dropped down to 20.2. This year we're going to be spending about over $7 trillion, greater than 23% of our economy. And we're going to collect about 17.1%. We've got in excess of a 6% structural deficit. It's clearly unsustainable. Now, I hear a lot of talk about, well, Ron, it's all mandatory spending, which is a problem. Okay, all these government shutdowns is all about 25% of federal spending, the discretionary accounts. We have 75% of our spending in mandatory. But you have to understand, it's not all Social Security, Medicare, or even Medicaid. Over the decades, I'm researching to see exactly how this happened. We've transferred what I would consider, and what probably formerly was, discretionary spending into other mandatory. So this year, we'll spend about $1 trillion in other mandatory spending. And what this chart shows is the variance between 2019 spending plussed up for population inflation, leaving Social Security, Medicare, and interest alone spent at 2025 levels. If we were to do that, instead of spending $7 trillion this year, we'd be spending about 6.5. Other mandatory, again, not Social Security, Medicare, or even Medicaid, we're spending $239 billion more than inflation and population adjusted 2019 spending. I don't think we were spending too little in 2019. Non-defense discretionary, up about $145 billion over fully inflated 2019 levels. So that's not the problem. Now, just one other fact I want to dispute, particularly for defense hawks in my party, because I hear it a lot. Well, the good news is we've got parity between defense spending and domestic spending. I don't know what figures they're looking at, but if you only consider non-defense discretionary, yeah, I mean, the increase from Bill Clinton is pretty close to 1-to-1, but that was before 9/11, before we're on a war footing. Under Obama, under Trump, is 1.4-to-1 to 1.64-to-1. But again, you can't ignore the other mandatory, that other $1 trillion nowadays. If you factor in non-defense discretionary and other mandatory, we've increased spending on domestic programs 2.5 times to 1. The defense, from Obama's spending, the increase is 3.5 times to 1. Under Trump, it's 3.65. So we don't have parity. I'm sorry, defense hawks. You have had your, lights out. You've lost that battle. We're not even close to parity. Whatever you think you're getting in defense, they're getting 3.5 times that in domestic spending. And again, we can't afford it. So again, those are just some basic facts, some basic figures that explain our current fiscal situation. But let me go back to where I started. Here we are again, another shutdown showdown. Democrats' opening bid, by the way, was, okay, we'll give you a 4-week CR, 4 weeks. And all we're asking is another $1.5 trillion in spending. So we'll end the turmoil, we'll quit playing games with people's lives for 4 weeks, as long as you agree to roll back everything you passed in the one big beautiful bill and increase spending $1.5 trillion. Is that a serious starting negotiation point? I don't think so. What I'm asking all my colleagues is, please imagine a world in which these ridiculous shutdowns are no more than a ridiculous relic of the past, where we're not wasting our time and effort and energy and angst over this partisan bickering. Again, I have to remind you, the Eliminate Shutdowns Act does not diminish the authority of the Appropriations Committee. If we do these rolling continuing appropriations, now the appropriators can get together, they can find areas of agreement like we did in this chamber on Veterans Affairs and military construction and that minibus. Where there's areas of disagreement, will take some time, find the compromises. As I said, I agree with the point that the problem with CRs is they fund programs that should be reduced or canceled, and they prevent important new programs from being started. There again, there's another incentive to do appropriations, and now you have the time to do it. We won't be wasting our time and effort and energy and angst on these charades. These are charades. Now, I can't predict exactly what would happen if we pass the Eliminate Shutdowns Act. Nobody can. I can predict we will never have another shutdown ever in the federal government. I'm okay with that. Again, I don't like CRs. I don't like our current spending level. I'm willing to concede much higher spending levels than I think we can afford to eliminate government shutdowns for all time. So I can predict that. But here's something else I think could happen. If we're not wasting our time on this partisan bickering over shutdowns, there have been so many discussions about bipartisan appropriation and budget reform. Things like 2-year appropriation cycles, where instead of 12 bills, which obviously we can't pass, how about doing 6? Make it manageable. The year you don't appropriate for an account, you're doing oversight, and just reverse the cycle. I mean, I'd even consider 3-year appropriation bills, 4 a year. That could impinge on future Congresses. So I understand that, again, there are complications to all these things, but think positively about what ending shutdowns could do for this body, for this government, for people's lives. Passing the Eliminate Shutdowns Act, eliminating shutdowns for all time, would be a signature achievement of this Congress. Think of that. We together on a bipartisan basis can say, we're the group. After the horrible assassination of Charlie Kirk, recognize this is the moment to come together as a nation, as a Senate, as a Congress. Do the right thing for the American people, end government shutdowns. That would be a signature achievement of this Congress, and I am hoping and praying that we do that. But let me be honest. Voting no on this bill, voting no is basically voting yes for continuing the chaos and for continuing to play partisan games with people's lives and our economy. That's what a no vote is. Voting yes would help cement this as a lasting legacy for this Congress. So again, I urge all of my colleagues, please, put this partisanship aside. Recognize the value of eliminating shutdowns and vote yes on this very simple, very common sense bill that I think, quite honestly, the American people want to see passed. Now, with just a couple more minutes, I do it because I sat through the chamber. I listened to all the arguments about the Obamacare subsidies. The temporary COVID enhanced Obamacare subsidies. Nobody's talking about doing away with Obamacare subsidies. But it first should be pointed out, the reason health insurance is so expensive on the individual market is because of the faulty design of Obamacare. We had high-risk pools to take care of people with pre-existing conditions. Need a couple tweaks to cover everybody. But that wasn't good enough for Democrats because they wanted a single-payer system, so they threw out and outlawed high-risk pools, and in its place, forced people on the individual insurance market to pick up the full cost of covering people with pre-existing conditions. That caused insurance rates on the individual market to skyrocket. That's why insurance prices continue to skyrocket on the individual market in particular. Now, what Democrats did during whole COVID is they basically removed any participation into the Obamacare exchanges from many millions of people that qualified. The result of that is massive fraud. You have unscrupulous agents and brokers who are signing people up, just using their name and their birth date, for health insurance that these people don't even know they're signed up for. So they don't make claims. Something like 12 million people on the Obamacare exchanges out of 20.5 million had no claims. Well, that's typical. Maybe 10 to 15% of people on insurance don't make claims because they're healthy. But 12 million out of 20.5? Estimates are at least 6 million don't even know they have the policy. So we are literally pouring tens of billions of dollars per year into insurance companies for policies for people that they don't even know they have them and they don't use them, while we're paying commission to those dishonest brokers. That's a massive level of fraud that apparently Democrats have no problem perpetuating. Republicans have a problem with that. We want to lower premiums by doing common sense reform and repairing the damage done by Obamacare. But again, I think what I heard on the floor needed some response. So, Mr. President, that's my response to that, and I'll just end, again, encouraging all my colleagues. The American people don't like these shutdowns. They want them ended. We have a very simple bill, not partisan. It really offers no advantage to anybody, which is perfect. It just keeps the government open and gives appropriators time to do appropriating, appropriate those departments, and end all the chaos, end all the turmoil, end all the playing games with people's lives. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.